A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear respected brothers and sisters. On this channel, I want to leave an archive of beneficial knowledge that will serve as Sadaqa Jariyah, because I've learned from my near-death experience that tomorrow truly isn't promised, and every second we are alive is because Allah wills it so. So in a sense, I am on borrowed time, and what I hope to achieve with this channel is that it would be one of those channels that you stumble upon at the right time of your life. I don't know when that may be for you, but all I know is that if this video reaches you, it was all by the will of God. For better or for worse, we ourselves will be the judge of that. So for this series, I will be backtracking the things I've learned during my psychedelic and spiritual journey before I was a Muslim. And the reason why this is something I even want to talk about or share with you is because this knowledge was revolutionary to me when I discovered it. And it helped me understand spirituality, reality, and eventually led me to Islam by the will of Allah and only by the will of Allah. Before we begin, you should know that I haven't been in touch with psychedelic knowledge after I became a Muslim, because God showed me that what I was desperately searching for with psychedelics already existed in the religion of Islam, that the enlightenment I was searching for all this time was actually the light and the truth of Islam. So inshallah, I will start us off with some psychedelic knowledge, and we will slowly transition into the beauties of Islam together and why it is the truth from God. Keep in mind, I'm not a scholar or a real student of knowledge, so this is just the speculations and the opinions of a revert who has a drug background. So for what it's worth, take what will serve you and leave that which does not concern you. So let's get to it. So to make a long story short on how my psychedelic journey started, one day a friend asked me if I had ever tried shrooms before, to which I replied no. And I told him that I don't ever plan on it. At that point in time of my life, I was only using marijuana. Then, my friend showed me some Vice videos about shrooms and psychedelics, and that shattered my false perception about these highly misunderstood entheogens, or as I used to call them, spiritual medicine or medicine for the soul. Even as a proud atheist and a skeptic, psychedelics piqued my interest the more I read about them. So after a few months of research and searching for these mushrooms, I have read countless trip reports about how people had come to discover God, finding the meaning of life, and meeting otherworldly entities or beings on them. So if people claim that they can find God and are convinced of his existence through these experiences, then the only thing left to do is for me to do it and to see for myself. And then I will decide if these people really are as crazy as they sound. And just to be clear, I'm not advocating for shrooms or psychedelics. If you happen to use them, know that it is at your own peril, because psychedelics will either open your mind, expand your mind, or shatter it. I have done research on them for months, and I made it my intention to find God, because when people use psychedelics ceremonially or ritualistically, they usually have an intention or question in mind before going into the trip, and that is my honest to God truth. Among the first things I've learned while experiencing psychedelics for the first time was the phenomenon of shapes or sacred geometry, to be precise. While under the effects of psychedelics, everything has a much deeper meaning, including shapes and colors. And these shapes would appear in my mind and somehow project itself into reality, often referred to as a hallucination. If it weren't for my research, I wouldn't have recognized these shapes as sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is a study of spiritual meaning of geometric shapes and patterns in nature and art. It is based on the idea that these shapes and patterns are the blueprint for the creation of life and existence. Sacred geometry is also an ancient practice that explores the mathematical principles underlying the creation of the universe. It is believed to be a universal language that connects us to the divine and reveals the underlying order and harmony in all things. At its core, sacred geometry is a fusion of mathematics, spirituality, and art. The fundamental shapes in sacred geometry includes circles, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and spirals. Some of the shapes I saw in my mind while hallucinating were the flower of life and a seed of life, as well as a multitude of fractal patterns. And after witnessing the breathtaking beauty of these magnificent shapes for myself, I went down the rabbit hole of sacred geometry and came to learn of what I am about to show you.
Science will always push the limits of our understanding. Humanity is on a quest to expand our knowledge, to dig deeper, to look further, and to uncover the truth of reality. For generations, religious teachings once held to the belief that Earth was only a few thousand years old. With the rise and study of evolution and geology, a consensus emerged that our planet was actually millions of years older. By the 1920s, radiometric dating would lead to the current understanding that Earth is 4.55 billion years old. But where did the Earth come from? In the same decade, a Belgian priest named Georges Lemaitre introduced the Big Bang Theory, in which he theorized that the universe began from a single primordial atom. The idea received a major boost from Edwin Hubble's observations that galaxies across the cosmos are speeding away from us in all directions, as well from the 1960s discovery of cosmic microwave radiation. But where did the Big Bang come from? What happened before the Big Bang, which occurred 13.8 billion years ago? Someday we might know the answer, and once we have the answer, the next logical question will be, what came before that? Sacred geometry reverse engineers our method of scientific exploration. It does so by starting with the logical beginning of everything, which is nothing. Before there was something, there was nothing. The universe was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The first thing to come into existence was a point. Before anything could be, it has to start with a point. A point occupies no space, it has no dimensions. It's so small it can't be measured, yet it encompasses everything within it. You could say this point is spirit. And what is the first thing that spirit does? It becomes conscious. It becomes aware. 360 degrees of awareness in the vast emptiness of the void. The ancient Egyptians believed that this innate aspect of consciousness is what sparked the process of creation. Then what did spirit do? The only thing it could do, it moved. The first 3 lines of Genesis in the King James Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Now, interpretations of the Bible have varied a lot over time, but the important thing to note here is that movement happened before there was light. From the vantage of pure physics or mathematics, motion is impossible in a void. You can't go anywhere, or fall, or rotate. There's just infinite emptiness in all directions. So in order to move, you need something in relation to move to. Before there was light, there was movement. Once spirit created a point in space, it was able to move to the edge of its awareness and expand consciousness, creating another circle to form the Vesica Pisces. This football-shaped opening in the middle is the geometric image through which light was created, and it is also the geometric shape through which our eyes receive light. Spirit would continue to expand its awareness, following the Genesis pattern by moving to each intersection of the circumferences and expanding. The second movement creates the third circle, which forms the Holy Trinity. With each movement, more information unfolds. By the fourth motion, we have moved halfway around the first circle, 180 degrees from the first motion. On the fourth day of Genesis, exactly half of creation was completed. After 6 movements, 6 days, a geometric miracle takes place. We have a complete pattern, the seed of life. This complete pattern is called the seed of life, for it contains the recipe of life and all its potential. The second rotation of circles forms a 3-dimensional shape. The ancients who were concerned with life and death called this cluster of spheres the egg of life. Your entire existence is dependent on the egg of life structure. Everything about you, from your height to your eye color, was created through the egg of life form. Spirit would continue this pattern with a third rotation. 19 circles produces the flower of life, a shape that is found in ancient cultures around the world. From China to Ireland to Egypt to India, they all had some notion of the flower of life. Why is this shape so special? Because the information hidden in the flower of life is so important and so sacred that our ancient ancestors had to keep it secret, which was appropriate at that time. However, now, we either use the information or fall further into darkness. When the flower of life is extended out and all the circles are completed, the fruit of life is revealed. This is the secret. Out of the flower comes the fruit. The fruit of life is an entirely feminine shape. Curved lines are feminine. They represent formlessness and emotion. Once we add masculine energy or lines, the formless begins to take shape. This is Metatron's cube, and it contains the fabric of reality, because out of this shape, we get the Platonic solids. Platonic solids have faces that are all the same size, edges that are all the same length, angles that are all the same degree. And if put into a sphere, all points will touch the edge of the sphere. These shapes were studied in ancient times by the Egyptians, who passed the knowledge to the Greeks, where Pythagoras would study them, and later Plato, which is where we get the name Platonic. There are 5 Platonic solids: the cube, the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the isosahedron, and the pentagonal dodecahedron. Earth, air, fire, water, and ether, or prana. Each Platonic solid corresponds to a different element, and every element of the periodic table has a geometric relation to one of the Platonic solids. From the motion of atoms, to molecules, to viruses, to snowflakes, to the shape of sound, to the orbits of the planets in our solar system, everything stems from this basic geometric information system. And it all starts with spirit. Looking at ancient myths and religious teachings in a metaphorical sense, and less in a literal materialistic sense, will allow us to decipher the encoded wisdom and may perhaps serve to bridge the divide between spirit and science. As above, so below. There's as much greater than us than there is lesser than us. There's as much outside us as there is within. Everything above us and everything below us is constructed from geometric relationships. When we study sacred geometry, we begin to understand our place in the universe. All this expansion of consciousness, all this curious exploration is really about finding out who we are. We are a mystery to ourselves, and to uncover where we came from is to know ourselves on the deepest level. Everything, from the smallest particle to the biggest star, is connected, and you are at the absolute center of it all. Philosophy is written in this grand book, the universe, which stands continually open to our gaze. But the book cannot be understood unless one first learns to comprehend the language and read the letters in which it's composed. It is written in the language of mathematics, and its characters are triangles, circles, and other geometric figures, without which it is humanly impossible to understand a single word of it. Without these, one wanders about in a dark labyrinth. Galileo Galilei. The golden ratio describes predictable patterns on everything from atoms to huge stars in the sky. The ratio is derived from something called the Fibonacci sequence, named after its Italian founder, Leonardo Fibonacci. In the sequence, each number is simply the sum of the two preceding numbers: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. This simple sequence produces an amazing proportion of 1.618, which is known by many other names: the golden ratio, the golden mean, phi, and the divine proportion, among others. So why is this number so important? Well, almost everything has dimensional properties that adhere to the ratio of 1.618, so it seems to have a fundamental function for the building blocks of nature. For billions of years, life on Earth has evolved around this proportion to maintain balance and harmony. Our ancient ancestors incorporated the golden ratio into their structures and daily lives.
What I just showed you was something that I was studying very deeply and passionately about during my psychedelic experience. And after I became a Muslim, I saw a video talking about the same thing, but from the Islamic perspective, which to me is the highest level of truth that transcends all forms of spirituality. And it brings me peace to know that the Islamic world already has knowledge about this, as they should.
ويريكم آياته فأي آيات الله تنكرون.
From the galactic bodies to the tiny creatures, from the strongest to the weakest, everything in the nature follows some specified functions with precise measurements. It's because they're destined to do so. Let's for a moment think about the work of engineers or architects. They use functions and measurements to provide some properly functioning products with aesthetic appearance. In order to give you an example, let's think of a very simple function to draw a pattern in a circle, like 2x. So we start with a circle that has 10 equidistant points. Then we assign numbers to every single point. And we want to join every point with the help of given function by just replacing the x values with the number of each point. We start with the 0. 2 times 0 equals 0, so it's the same thing. Now 2 times 1 equals 2, so we connect the 1 to the 2. Then 2 times 2 equals 4. And we connect that point to the point number 4. So we continue until we get this pattern. At the beginning we started with 10 points, but if we increase the number of points, then we'll get more and more precise result with a cardioid shape. And if we change the function itself, we'll get many different patterns. But let me ask you something. Have you seen something in the nature that follows the same function? Well, the answer is yes. If you observe the reflection of light in a circular object, like a coffee cup, then you can see the same pattern. That means the photons of light are following the same function by hitting one edge of the cup and reflecting to the other edge at a calculated angle. Not only the reflection of light in a circular shape, rather everything else in the nature follows some specified rules and functions with extraordinary precision. To give you an example of the precision of those functions, let's consider the number pi. Pi is an irrational number which has infinite decimal places. It means if you have a computer at the size of universe, then the storage capacity of that computer would not be enough to store the exact value of pi unless you round it. So where did the number pi come from? It's actually the ratio of circumference of any circle to its diameter. It means a circle can always be calculated with the number pi if we have one of its variables. Now, let's consider you have two sliding blocks and a wall, and we suppose that there is no energy loss and the surface has no friction. The first block starts by coming in at some velocity from the right, while the second one starts stationary. The simplest case is when both blocks have the same mass. The first block hits the second, transferring all of its momentum. Then the second one bounces off the wall, then transfers all of its momentum back to the first, which then sails off towards the infinity. 3 total clacks. What about if the first block has 100 times the mass of the second one? It's not entirely obvious how to predict the dynamics here, but to have a little bit understanding, let's just watch what happens. That second one will be bouncing back and forth between the wall and the first block with 100 times its mass, slowly and discreetly redirecting the first block's momentum to point in the opposite direction. In total, there will be 31 collisions before each block is sliding off to the infinity, never to be touched again. Now, what if the first block will be 10,000 times the mass of the second one? In that case, there would be quite a few more clacks, all happening very rapidly at one point, adding up all into 313 collisions. Well, actually, hang on. Wait for it. Wait. Okay, 314 clacks. If it was 1,000,000 times the mass of the second one, then again, with all our idealistic condition, almost all clacks happen in one big burst, this time resulting in 3,141 total collisions. Perhaps you have seen what's happening here. Yes, every time the number of collisions compute pi. It means the mechanism of collision in our assumed case was following a function that computes pi. Of course, such thing is maybe not possible in real physics because there are some other forces acting in the universe, but that's what happens when you calculate the number of collisions between two bodies in a condition where there is no other force like gravity acting on the bodies. Or just simulate this example in a physics simulation software, and you get the amazing result. It's because pi calculates the circles, and circles are everywhere in the nature. Because every time you have a curved thing and a straight thing, in order for them to interact, there's some pi going on. Nature doesn't like always going in a straight line because sometimes things interact. If you throw a ball in the air, it's not going to go in a straight line, it's going to go in a curve. And that means lots of things in the nature follows pi. A further example is the astonishing collection of numbers, the Fibonacci series. These numbers can be appreciated in many different ways. From the standpoint of calculation, they are as easy to understand as 1 plus 1, which is 2. Then 1 plus 2 is 3, and then 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on. This series of numbers was introduced by Leonardo of Pisa. In terms of application, Fibonacci numbers appear in nature surprisingly often. The number of petals in a flower is typically a Fibonacci number, or the number of spirals on a sunflower or pineapple tends to be Fibonacci number as well. In fact, there are many more applications of Fibonacci numbers. One of the most amazing characteristics of this series is the beautiful pattern that appears in them. For example, let's consider the squares of the Fibonacci numbers. Well, you may not expect something special by adding the squares of those numbers, but let's see what the outcome is. If you add 0 plus 1, you'll get 1. By adding 1 plus 1, you'll get 2, and then 1 plus 4, you'll get 5, 4 plus 9, 13, and so on. In this pattern, you are always escaping one number in the series. But what happens by cumulative adding of the squares of this series? Here is the result. 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 4 is 6. Add 9 to that, you'll get 15. Add 25, you'll get 40. And then add 64, you'll get 104. The results are not Fibonacci numbers, but surprisingly the Fibonacci numbers are hidden inside these numbers. Do you see them? Have a closer look. Yes, 6 is 2 times 3, 15 is 3 times 5, 40 is 5 times 8, 104 is 8 times 13, and so on. But the most beautiful characteristics of this series is that it leads us to an important number called golden ratio. If you every time divide the greater number with its neighboring smaller number, then you will get the golden ratio. This ratio is also called divine proportion that can be found in numerous events in the nature. These were only a few examples of the perfect order that's being followed by the nature. The reason we have shown all of these to you was to once again remind you that everything in the nature is calculated with precise measurements, and that everything in the existence follows the functions that are set for them. Any rational mind can easily understand that none of these laws and regulations comes out of coincidence. Rather, such a complex universe with all its laws and functions needs a wise designer who created everything with perfect precision and set these rules to govern the entire existence.
الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء فقدره تقديرا.
And so this takes me to a quote by Galileo. He said, "The laws of nature are written by the hands of God in the language of mathematics." And a verse from the Quran, Surah 41, Ayah 53 reads, "And we will show them our signs in the horizon and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. But is it not sufficient concerning your Lord that He is over all things a witness. So this is about all I want to share about sacred geometry. If you wish to know more, you can do your own research on it. I've been down that rabbit hole before, and through this knowledge, I had come to learn that everything is connected. As above, so below, so within, so without. I'll see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.